Good evening, folks. My name is Ali Hessami. I'm an engineer by education and training, been involved in safety, security, sustainability from a scientific point of view, and spent the last 8 years of my professional engagement in the field of artificial intelligence and ethics of using AI for the benefit of humanity. As Francis alluded to, I have the pleasure of co-chairing the local UN association with him in the boroughs of Enfield and Barnet. And a while ago, we decided to embark on looking at a couple of sustainable development goals. And that's what I would like to share with you tonight. First, I would take a quick look at the issues of global warming and its influence on food, set the scene, and then we look at what we found in the borough of Enfield. Of course, the work is a collective effort by all the members of UNA. So, what we commenced earlier this year, a few months ago, was to focus on what UN calls Sustainable Development Goals. They defined 17 of these back in 2015-16, and the target date for achieving these global targets is around 2030. So basically, we started looking at one of these for the immediate attention, and one hopefully soon on SDG 2, which is on hunger, and the target of the Sustainable Development Goal number 2 by UN is to obviously alleviate and eliminate hunger internationally. We as a group meet fairly frequently, twice a month, one occasion face to face. We homed in our discussions on SDG 2 on zero hunger, and number 13 that we haven't done any work on yet on climate action. But both of these we are doing from a viewpoint of impact on humans rather than technicalities and net zero type targets. SDG 2 is defined by the UN as ending hunger, and it's got a number of targets, and we chose a subset of these targets. And our intention was to see what happens in the context of SDG 2, which is largely aimed at developing nations in the context of UK and a fairly affluent part of UK, London, and one of its boroughs where we live ourselves. So that was the motivation behind our research. And if we started looking at how vulnerable we are in terms of various nations and economies to climate change, we would notice that whilst, as Francis explained, much of the climate is changing due to human influence in terms of burning fossil fuels, we have a fairly disproportionate impact on the developing nations. The top 10 positions are all in Africa, whereas the top 10 emitting nations are not Africans. They start from China and US and even UK somewhere down the list. And the problem is the issues created by excessive use of fossil fuels and emitting greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide is unfairly impacting on other nations rather than those who create it. So if we are going into SDG 2, it's probably instructive to have a quick look at some definitions so that we have some common reference. Well, there's no need to explain what hunger is, but food insecurity is when we cannot guarantee access to safe and nutritious food for development and sustenance, basically, for leading a healthy life. And the estimates in 2024 was that roughly 309 million were facing acute levels of food insecurity in roughly 70 countries. And that's a huge number. If you think about 21st century, we still have 300 million who can't guarantee they're going to get the next meal. That's food insecurity for you. And of course, climate change is going to make matters worse because food production, the world has a certain capacity for food production. And overall, the estimates were, these are quotations from the references I've put there for you, like this one's from Telegraph on 24th of July this year, that's 757 million people. That is 1 in 11 of human beings on Earth are facing hunger. And they were facing hunger almost a year ago, and you can imagine things are not improving. And unfortunately, as I said, there is a degree of disparity and unfairness in this, that the ratio in Africa is 1 in 5. So in a sense, it's twice as bad in the African continent. Therefore, climate is definitely not helping in terms of increasing degrees of vulnerability to flooding, excess heat, to impact on water supply, on food chain, on agricultural yield, etc. So overall, food insecurity levels, as you can notice here, of the order of 25 to 30% average for the whole world, and different continents have different degrees of food insecurity, with Africa exceeding almost twice as the rest of the world. So what is regarded as hunger is the biggest challenge facing humanity, even though it is one of the most solvable issues. That is, there are many ways to mitigate this risk globally, from that 700 million who are going without, or maybe 1 meal a day. But at the same time, there is not a huge step taken towards alleviating this global issue. We have already talked about 300 million people already facing acute food insecurity, which probably means not getting any meals throughout the day for multiple days. Now, there is a global food security index, and as you can see, various countries are rated here for degrees of availability and security of food, and it takes into account, this index, in terms of how affordable food is, what is local people's ability to purchase nutritious, adequate amount of food for well-being, how available it is, what is its quality, and is basically safety in terms of being free from harm when you consume it, and degree of sustainability. How can you continue with that degree of access? And when you also look at the reasons behind populations being affected by hunger and insecurity, one of those is fundamentally conflicts, which is one of the major contributor, and the second one is degree of waste in the food industry, that technically UN believes 1/3 of all the food produced for human consumption is wasted. So imagine if we could reduce the amount of wastage, 1/3 of the food would most likely be able to feed that 300 million people in 70 other countries. And that is huge tonnage, about 1.3 billion tons of wasted food approximately $1 trillion annually. As we discussed, the impact of changing climate is going to be adverse on food availability. If you remember those food security index, availability, affordability, as well as probably quality and safety. So the extreme heat that we were discussing earlier is going to combine with basically instability in the weather pattern, wet winters, and severely affect the traditional crops, including the staple diets of onions, potatoes, sugar beet, etc. So, as Francis referred to, currently many of the forecasts is saying by the end of the century, if we do not come up with severe action containing the rise in temperature, we could expect anywhere between 2.5 degrees to 4.5 degrees centigrade by 2100. And by casting our sights beyond that to 2300, we're talking about roughly 10 degrees temperature rise. We, at the Paris Agreement, the general consensus in 2016 was that we should keep the temperature rise below 1.5 to 2 degrees. Anything above that is likely to be severely damaging to human populations, to food availability, water, extreme weather conditions. But such is the nature of what we are facing if we do not take immediate, this is action. In fact, it's regarded as the most pressing existential threat to humanity, other than the scourge of conflict and war, which we seem to be quite good at causing ourselves, whilst we are also facing. And as you remember, 2022 hit a heat wave in the UK with 40 degrees, 40.3 degrees being noted. So things are getting out of hand in a sense because we are not containing the temperature rise and we are not reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, in the context of food insecurity, as we have already discussed, that same applies to temperature rise, extremes of temperature. We have vulnerable groups, including children, at the sharpest end of the food poverty, roughly 3 million children, most of them going hungry as a result of going to school hungry. They cannot concentrate, they cannot make progress, they're unable to study, and the estimates are that a quarter of state school pupils qualify for free school meals, and unfortunately another 800,000 who are also in poverty for administrative reasons don't seem to be qualifying for this. So extreme heat last year had an impact on food availability, global productions, which led in 2022 to roughly £400 per household increase in food costs for the family, and 2023 at another 200. So we are basically ending up in 2 years, £600 more spent on combined energy rise, price of energy, as well as climate impact, which is largely on food price and availability. There was a research done by Gordon Brown, and he looked at food insecurity statistics across the nation in the United Kingdom. And some of his metrics are here. They're hilarious. We have got 850 cinemas, 1,200 hospitals, and 2,800 food banks. And according to him, 15, 16 years ago, not very many people had heard of this phenomena of food banks, and now it's becoming a structural fixture in the national life. And you will see from some of the statistics and the research that we have done in the borough of Enfield that having food banks in one of the richest countries on earth, fifth or sixth place at the top of the scale, is basically regarded as a scar on the collective conscience of the uh, permanent and a permanent stain on Britain's conscience and character. So food crisis is getting worse, and you can see food parcels being handed out from 2010 to, and this is a rising trend. We can't do much about it. And the number of people in food insecurity position in one of the richest countries in the world that hasn't got problems of distribution or problems of access or availability are also on the rise. As you can see, almost 50% increase in 22-23 for adults and likewise for children. Many causes you could, and our research hasn't managed to delve into substantially into the causes, but universal credit being inadequate, the household support fund being the last line of defense, and food banks being basically the social safety net for those who run out of money and those families who are pushed to universal credit do not immediately qualify for handouts and access to those funds. So there are a few weeks, 5 weeks before they actually get their money. And but how do they survive in those circumstances? We need to get deeper into understanding the root causes. But one thing is sure, the statistics also tell us that there is price rise, there is price rise on food stuff, energy bills, rents, and we had very high inflation up to a while ago, if you remember. But food price inflation has been roughly 30% in the UK. Right. The other facet is that roughly half of the UK's food is imported, and unfortunately, those countries from which we import our food deficit that we cannot produce in the United Kingdom are themselves subject to crisis, largely impacted by temperature rise and basically the climate effects like flooding and storms, about a quarter of those in the Mediterranean area. That means basically half of that food that we import, of our food consumption that we import, is not secure itself. So there is an issue. The problem, unfortunately, goes beyond food. And as the Gordon Brown's report that was reflected in Guardian earlier this year in June 2024, it extends into so-called multi-banks, not just food banks, and they care for anything from hygiene material to household items that people are short of or they cannot get hold. Now, our research, collective research by the UN Association members, looking at both the UK trends as well as the borough of Enfield, we obviously discovered that one of the largest networks is run by Trussell Trust that technically basically manages half of these food banks in the UK, and it's reporting rise in demand on its resources. And Trussell Trust basically aspires to go towards eliminating need for food banks, but at the same time finds itself inevitably much in demand, and there is not much choice for actually doing away with the service that they provide in the societies. And As you can see, 3.1 million emergency food parcels were handed in the last 12 months. Similar to climate impact, we either have options for mitigation when it comes to food, and when it comes to impact of climate is basically cutting emissions where we can, go towards net zero, keep the temperature, global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees below, maximum 2 degrees, or support farmers towards more sustainable and resilient methods of agriculture that are more resilient to extreme heat and drought. And there are many staple diets and crops that are at risk in the UK itself, from onions and cauliflower and wheat and potatoes to various forms of oil. So our focus on sustainable development goal number 2 eventually came to a conclusion. We decided to publish our report, and it was published almost 10 days or so ago. It is available for general access, so anyone who's interested, if I'll share the link, and I would appreciate if Francis or manages to paste it into the chat box in case people can find it easier there. Failing all of that, do email me and I'll be glad to send you a link where you can download it from. We also intend to go beyond just discovering some of these facts and hopefully develop a educational package where you can also share with the colleges, universities, and other enterprises. I've got only a couple more slides, if I may finish quickly.
We want to get some questions in, Ali, and we're getting very close to the end.
Just to mention that the report there is a link that I would share myself on the chat utility with everyone. We have contributors. 6 of our members have all been contributing to the development of the report. And obviously, we have found that out of 330,000 in the borough, we have a fair part of the borough under sort of multiple deprivation index, and the household income being below London average. These are all causes of basically food insecurity in the borough. And the Trussell Trust and the Felix Project are the main operators in the borough. We have 11 food banks and 5 so-called pantries. Children are amongst a fairly high percentage of people who are at risk in the borough, as you can see in Edmonton, Southgate, and Enfield North. So are the size of the operation. They are fairly large, the Trussell North Enfield Food Bank and the Felix Project warehouse base. We have 20 small-scale food banks. All of these are highlighted in our report. And just to quote that the Enfield Dispatch reminded us in July that the demand has trebled just in 6 years. That's a quick map of where the food banks are in London area, and fair number, as I said, 25 enterprises in the borough. These are the conclusions of our report. Hopefully, we can discuss some of these, but I appreciate that Francis is keen to engage you all in the discussion and hopefully hearing your views. Thank you.